I remember when someone asked Mother Teresa, "What do you do every day in the streets of Calcutta?" She had a wonderful, profound answer. She said, "Every day I see Jesus Christ in all of his distressing disguises. I see the unfolding of Source, the unfolding of God, the unfolding of Spirit in all that I encounter."
I have a very, very strong belief that everyone that comes into our life, everyone, from the stranger sitting next to us on the bus, to the person driving next to us on the freeway, to our children, our husbands and wives, and parents and all of that, they all come to us as teachers. And that the key to being effective and awakening in our lives is to be students rather than teachers. To see them all as someone who has something to teach us, otherwise they wouldn't be there. You begin to look at it that way. You take away some of your supercilious attitudes and your holier than thou, better than somebody else, elitist kind of thinking, and you begin to look at, what does this person have to teach me? In all my traveling all over the world, if I'm in Istanbul and I meet a beggar standing there with one arm and one leg, I know that that person has something to teach me, that they're in my life for something, whether it's, and I can learn something from that person. And it may just be to be a little more generous and to give a little more, or it may be to just give a smile or to be loving or whatever, but there's a lesson there for us.
If you go out and just go for a walk this afternoon when you get home, just look at the perfection of all that is. Just look at the clouds and look at the sky and look at the ocean and look at the trees and look at the leaves, and even more important, look at the space between the leaves. And look at the invisibleness and the perfection of how everything is. There's a constancy, if you will. And this constancy is always there. And your goal, my goal, in the time that I have with you here today, is to convince you to go to a place within yourself where you can emulate that divine perfection which requires you to do nothing, which never uses force, which never pushes itself.
The most important thing that you can get out of this is to understand that you are a choice-making individual, and that all of the conditions that you find yourself in your life, all of the circumstances of your life, all of the emotional reactions that you have to all of the people and all of the things and events and so on that take place in your life are really choices. And that's a very difficult thing for a lot of people to get, because they're raised to believe that I can't help the way I feel. I have a right to be miserable when somebody treats me in a certain way. I can't help it. I've always been that way. It's just my nature. It's just the kind of person that I am. People use things like it's I'm Italian, or I'm from New York, or I just grew up in a family that always talked to each other like this, and I can't help myself. And these are the kinds of things that I really wanted to attack and eradicate from your thinking. That is, that you can't help the way that you are. You indeed are the product of all of the choices that you've made up until this moment. And if you do not like what your life is about, I'm always reminded of James Allen in As a Man Thinketh. He said that circumstances do not make a man, they reveal him. And the circumstances of your life truly reveal what kinds of choices that you have made up until now. Which means that in order to rid yourself of erroneous owns, or get past the negativity and the doubt and the judgment and the kinds of emotional reactions that get in your way, you have to put responsibility first and foremost on yourself. You have to rid yourself of the inclination to blame other people for what is wrong with you, to blame your circumstances, to look backwards in your life and look at your family and come up with all kinds of real nice explanations, but they really don't help you to get past these kinds of emotional reactions.
When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Albert Einstein once observed that You have the most fundamental and major decision that you have to make in your life is this. Do I live in a friendly or a hostile universe? Which is it? Is it a universe that is filled with hostility and anger and people wanting to hate each other and people wanting to kill each other? Is that what you see? Because when you see the world that way, that's exactly what you will create for yourself in your life. This is from great scientific minds.
The idea of having a quiet mind. When I first started practicing meditating, which I encourage people to do, not from any Far Eastern guru loincloth kind of thing at all, but as a way of understanding that there's another dimension. If I were to take you, the listener, and to put you in chains, and to put you in a dungeon, and to deny you light and human contact for the rest of your life, you would probably say to yourself, this is the end. I mean, this is the end. I can't handle this. There are some people, believe it or not, among us, who, if you were to do that very same thing, would say, this is a beginning. There's a whole world there. If any of us were forced to learn how to go into that world, we would discover many, many, many things about ourselves. And I'm talking about the world of the mind. It's not an accident that all of the great spiritual masters have encouraged a kind of meditation of one kind or another, and that most advanced people, most awakened people, practice it on a regular basis. It's not an accident. You begin to discover how slimy your mind is. The thoughts that you have all the time, and how much disasterizing we do with our minds, and how much stuff that we occupy our minds with that is so unnecessary and so silly, so foolish, so destructive, that quieting our mind and meditating really go hand in hand. Now, meditating doesn't require a lot of training. It doesn't require somebody teaching you exactly how to do it or whatever, because that defeats the purpose of meditating. When you meditate, you really want to go in there and quiet your mind. And what you want to be able to do in your life is to have an open, but not a rampage going on inside of your mind, not 1,000 thoughts barraging it. And these thoughts that you have, these are yours. These are your creation. I used to tell people as a therapist, if you don't believe that you're in control of your thoughts, then I want you to tell me who is. Then I want you to find all those people who are in control of your thoughts and send them all to me. Then I will treat them, and you will get better, which is absurd. Obviously, you're not going to get better by treating somebody else. You are the creator of thought, which means that in some metaphysical way, you're the creator of your life. Thought originates with each one of us. But most of us have trained ourselves to believe that whatever we think just sort of happens, and thoughts just sort of, I call it the pop-in theory, you know? They just sort of pop in, and I can't help it. Boop, there's a thought, and it's just there. And I can't help it, it just happened. That isn't true when you train your mind. We spend so much of our energy training ourselves in all kinds of areas. We train ourselves in business. If we're going to get a new computer system, we go out and we spend millions of dollars in a company, and we train people how to work it. And we want to become good at golf or swimming or tennis or backgammon or anything that you can think of. We know that we got to go out and we got to practice and we got to train ourselves. We train ourselves, and we ignore our mind, which is 99% of who we are. We just completely ignore it. Like there's no training available for our minds. And we can all do that. I've really learned how to do it myself. No one ever taught me. You know, when I used to teach at university, I taught in Berlin for half a year. There was 70 students in the class. And I would have the first student introduce themselves and their name. Then I would have the second student introduce the person who was just introduced and himself. And each time I would repeat it. And I'd have the third student introduce the two that he had just introduced plus himself. And we do that for the whole class. By the time we got to the 70th student, they had to introduce everybody in the class by name, and I would then repeat each one of them. And I just had a very simple technique for doing that. It was just like concentrated effort on making my mind remember 70 people's names in an hour and a half. Now, I wasn't doing it to waste an hour and a half. This was a class on teaching people how to identify neurotic behavior in people. And it's like what I wanted to do was to teach them that they could do things with their minds, just like their patients do, that they never thought of, that they never even dreamt were possible for them. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, they would have like 80, 90% recall. And by the end of the 4th or 5th week, everybody knew everybody's name in the class, and they had all trained themselves. And most people go out there and they're introduced to somebody, they say, hello, my name is Wayne. They say, what would you say your name was? They can't remember one person's name in 1 minute. And they think that, oh, I have a poor memory. But it's because they don't train. Well, the mind can be trained, and meditating is a perfect way to do that. And there's a wonderful world in there, in your mind. Quieting your mind means that you're no longer susceptible to all of the external influences that are around you. I'm always amazed when I watch the U.S. Open tennis championships that are played in New York right near LaGuardia at how the players are able to continue playing with jets going on overhead. And yet, when I am really completely involved in a tennis match, I've had people where I've played, I've had jackhammers going next to me, and my opponent is going crazy. They have to go over it, and I tell them, I don't notice it. My concentration is on the ball. And I don't hear that lawnmower going off or the jackhammer going or the airplane going on overhead. We can train ourselves to do that. The people who are really good at any game or any activity that requires concentration know how to do that. Well, we all want to be able to be better at that, and we don't want to have our minds occupied, particularly with worry and anxiety and stressful kinds of things. So you have to learn how to focus your mind, how to get focused, and keep yourself from creating those kinds of thoughts that are always impinging on your consciousness. Miracles are available there. You talk about surrendering. I meditated for a long time. It's like there would be a light. I would have this light that I would create. And it's really interesting that you can create a light with your eyes closed in a dark room. So you don't really need your eyes to create light. You need your mind to create light. Your mind can create light. And all of us do it in our dreams. We can create a color in our dream without any light. So that our minds are capable of producing that, and our minds can create smells, and we can create sounds. We do all of that in our dream, and that's just a pure thought state. So what you want to do is get to that pure thought state.
But remember the word coincidence. In mathematics, it's a term that defines angles that coincide. And in mathematics, two angles that coincide are said to be angles that fit together perfectly. And we have taken a term that means something that fits together perfectly and interpret it to mean that is something that fits together and shows up accidentally or in chaos. But actually, anything that is coincidental with something else is a fit that is perfect. And there are no accidents in this universe. When you begin to access a power, you start to have an awareness that it's absurd to believe that in a universe which has an intelligence behind it, that an accident could show up. Everything is a part of the perfection of it. Everything. There are no accidents in this universe. You came in when you were supposed to, you'll leave when you're supposed to. The children that came through you or didn't come through you are all part of that perfection. Questioning it, challenging it, all it does is keep you from accessing the ability to manifest and attract into your life what you really would like to have when you begin to question it. And when you ask, now the question always comes up when I talk about these kinds of things is, well, if there is a force, and this force is a part of the perfection and there are no accidents, at what point do I have a free will? And am I making any of these decisions? And Jung answered that question brilliantly. He said, at the same moment that you are a protagonist in your own life and you're making choices, you are also the spear carrier or the extra in a much larger drama. You are doomed to make choices. And that paradox is something you have to live with. Yes, you are making choices. Yes, you have the capacity to attract into your life virtually anything you want. And yes, there is an intelligence into which you can connect that can access virtually anything you put your attention on. And yes, it's all part of the perfection of the universe. Yes, both of those things you have to live with at the same time. You have to transcend those dichotomies. But I want to speak just for a few moments about what happens when you leave ordinary levels of awareness and you leave these lower energies. When you leave the energy of the solid, where all of your problems occur, when you leave that and move into this energy of spirit, wherein you only have love to give away, as I spoke about earlier, where your response to sadness is always a higher energy of joy, where your response to doubt is always a higher energy of faith, where your response to hatred is always the higher energy of love. When you practice what Francesco taught us in that very famous prayer attributed to St. Francis, what happens when you reach these higher spiritual energies is that you start to access something in which you can see it coming. And you get outside of yourself, as I just spoke about. And that is called intuition. And that intuition is available to you, that you can practice it virtually any time in your life, but you've got to get out of these lower and slower energies because it's not accessible there. It doesn't exist there. Problems exist there. Fear exists there. Worry exists there. Guilt exists there. Hatred exists there. Anger exists there. These are all lower and slower energies. And when you listen to the 10th principle, you'll see that they're not just lower energies, but they weaken us whenever we access them and whenever we use them. But when we get outside of them, we start to get out in front. And now I suggest to you, brazenly, that you don't have to have accidents in your life. That you don't have to be a victim of crime in your life. That you don't have to live in a world of scarcity in your life. You don't have to. If you're willing to take responsibility for whatever acts of crime have come your way without guilt, if you're willing to, and just say, I own them, they're mine, I've attracted it for some reason. If you're willing to say, I have had these various accidents and I've attracted that into my life, I don't understand why, but I know that it's mine. If you're willing to say that I've attracted the wrong people into my life, people who have abused me and victimized me, and I have taught people how I'm willing to be treated, and I'm no longer willing to do that, and so I'm going to send out a different attractor energy. If you're willing just to take responsibility without guilt, I underline it, I don't want any letters, okay? I underline it. You do not deserve any of it. You have not been punished for the things that have happened in your life. You just own them. They're yours. Because you can't get past them if you're waiting for something outside of you to change. You get past them by taking responsibility for them. Then what happens is you start seeing an accident coming. And many of you have had that experience. When you are in a higher frequency in your life, and you have an intuitive sense that, I know it's a green light, but I think I better stop. You know, a lot of heads nodding up and down. And something tells you, whatever it might be, something tells you, I better stop and slow down here. And zoom, there goes somebody through a red light, and you stop and you have that feeling that goes through you. You go, what was that? What was that? And you know when you can access that? When you're close to God. When you're in fear, you can't access it. Now, I'm in a 72-year-old body today. I remember being in a 20-year-old body, and a 30-year-old body, and a 40-year-old body. And you can't find one cell of the body that I was in when I was 20 years old, 50 years ago. There's not one cell left. You go out there, and I can't find it. It had all kinds of flowing stuff coming out of my head, and, you know, it's like... gone. You're not doing anything. You're just being done. That's one of the things that the Tao says, that the Tao is just another term for God. The Tao does nothing. It leaves nothing undone. It leaves nothing undone. makes the planets stay in alignment, the sun comes out, the oceans are filled, there's life that goes on, fish reproduce themselves, roses show up, and there's nobody out there doing anything. It does nothing. So the question of who we are is can't be answered in physical terms, and it can't be answered with the senses. Your senses will lie to you. They will tell you something, and it's just not true, you know. I mean, our senses even tell us right now that we're sitting still when we're hurling through this ocean, right, at 20 knots. But we're also, so is the whole ocean hurling through space at something like 11 or 12,000 miles an hour. And it's also orbiting around the sun and turning on its axis. So it's turning, orbiting, and hurling all at the same moment. And your senses are saying, I'm just sitting here. You don't see with your eyes. You have to see through your eyes. The part of you that is processing what I'm saying here right now has no form to it, has no beginning, it has no end. There's an infinite part of you. There's an invisible part of you. And until you're comfortable with it and know it and understand that it is the creator, the creation takes place through this creative process within you, called your mind, called your thoughts, called your spirit, called your soul. And one of the things that I have learned is that it's necessary to understand what your soul is to follow your excitement. Now hear this. Your excitement is who you are. Just let that in. We're getting very philosophical. I love it when we get like this, especially when I know we have lots of time, so we can just take it, you know, just... Your excitement is who you are. You're not this body. It's the soul. It's this invisibleness. It's what causes you to feel passion. It's following your excitement. And it's something you can do at any time. And when you do, I guarantee you these two things. It will be effortless, and you will always be supported. It's always an effort when you are not following your excitement. What is it in here? What is that creative spark that just makes you want to do something, or you just feel drawn to do it? And the more you pay attention to this spark, this inner excitement, the more it will support you, and you'll find yourself doing amazing things, like really amazing things. Here's what Patanjali, the great 3rd century BC Indian scholar, great beautiful soul who was the father of meditation, one who taught me the japa meditation and the I am meditation. He said, when you are inspired, inspired means in spirit. When you are inspired, that means when you are following your excitement. When you are inspired by some great project, some extraordinary project, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself in a new and a great and a wonderful world. And then he said, and this is what I mean by being effortless, he said, dormant forces, faculties and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be, or I say were ever taught that you could become, because you were not raised to believe in your divinity. You were raised, as Rumi said in that thing I read between the Chinese and the Byzantines, you were raised to believe in your limitations. And you don't know that within you, you have God. You are God. God is not an external concept. It's what the ego has taught us that it is. So that if you can answer the question, who am I? Who am I? And understand that who you are is a divine speck, if you will, a divine fragment of the universal consciousness. God's one and only voice's silence means that God is that which is indivisible. There is no place that God is not. And you can't divide God up and say that God is on this side or God is on that side. I've often said that God isn't doing anything different now than God was doing an hour ago or 100 years ago. And God isn't doing anything different now than he will be doing 1,000 years from now. God is exclusively here and now, not elsewhere, not in heaven someplace apart from us, but here, now, and indivisible. And the word indivisible is very important, because that which is everywhere and cannot be separated or carved up is something that we have a great deal of difficulty in the world of the physical form experiencing and understanding. Because our world, the world of you listening here, is a world of dichotomies. It's a world of paradoxes. We divide everything up. And dichotomies are just our way of being. We divide everything in the world up. The only reason we know that something called darkness exists is because of light. If there was nothing called light, we wouldn't know anything called darkness. The only reason we have a concept called up is because we have something of its reverse called down. You've never seen a person with a front who doesn't have a back. You've never seen a person with an outside who doesn't have an inside. We divide everything. Everything is in the world of the divisible. In the Bhagavad Gita, it speaks about transcending the dichotomies, figuring out a way to get past the up-down, the male-female, the good-bad, the right-wrong, the old, the new, the alive and the dead. Everything has its dichotomy. You can always find its opposites. In fact, that's how the symbolism of language is created, through having opposites. We don't know about oneness in the physical world. Everything has its counterpart, its dichotomy, except for silence. Silence is the only experience that is the same as God. It is indivisible. You take silence, and we'll have some right now, and now let's just cut that in half. And what do we have? More silence. Let's take what we've cut in half and cut it in half again and again. And endlessly you attempt to divide into a dichotomy, silence, but you can never do it, because silence is indivisible. And silence is God's one and only voice. When you go into silence, you go into the place where you make conscious contact with God, whatever it is that God means to you. You make conscious contact with that omnipotent, omniscient force in the world, that omnipresence of God. And the reason I say that it's not crowded along the extra mile is because the mile that most people are on is a very, very noisy mile. And I encourage young people to become more comfortable with silence. We live in a world of bulldozers and leaf blowers and trucks that make endless amounts of noise and chatter. And constantly, I have a home, a place a retreat that I go to frequently on Maui. And oftentimes I will walk in the morning and they're in a big building project in Maui. And I'll go past one building after another and start to count the noisemakers as all of these machines and all of these people who are trying to make the place look so pristine and so beautiful and so landscaped, instead of just letting it grow, just letting it be. Silence and God are one because you can't divide either one of them. Okay? So that going to silence as frequently as you can and understanding that out of silence, everything is created. The words that you are listening to right now as I speak emerge from silence. That silence is the source. And it's the source that is what we want to make conscious contact with. Like the source of all light is the sun. And the only reason we know about light is because of something called darkness. But when you go to the source can't be divided.